have to say I'm really happy to see you here tonight, genuinely, because cybersecurity is so important, and I really feel a lot of gratitude for anybody who takes it seriously and wants to learn more about it. So thank you. So the story behind this name, how we came to this name, is we were having one of our first meetings with the Columbus Web Group crew. And I was going to call it something long and boring and dry. And they were saying, you know, maybe it should be something snappier. And so I just said, well, why don't I just call it Why 2016 Cybersecurity Sucks? And I meant it as a joke. We all laughed and decided to go with it. And then for the subtitle, I pulled my Facebook friends to see what they thought it should be. I said, should it be how we can make cybersecurity better, how we can make it awesome, how we can make it suck less? And overwhelmingly, people voted for suck less. So that's the story. So I'm uncomfortable talking about myself, and my first couple versions of this talk didn't do this, but the Columbus Web Group crew kept encouraging me to. So when people ask me to talk about myself, the first thing I talk about is my values. And I know that not everybody starts that way, so I started thinking about why is that? And that's because of my family culture. So can you even see this? Can we turn down the lights a little bit because the screen is so dim? There we go. Maybe you can see it better. Okay. So in my family culture, everything was based on values. That was your essence of who you were. What do you care about is the first thing we wanted to know about people. And your values gave rise to your passion. What are you willing to work for? What do you want to do to make something better? And then that would lead to deep, burning curiosity, because learning was a deep value in my family. And then eventually we'd pick a particular focus, because it's hard to do research deeply on a wide topic. So we'd find a topic that was our focus. And then the ultimate goal of this research and discovery was to communicate with others, was to share what we learned, to persuade and inspire and inform. So this is sort of hard-coded into who I am. So when we moved to Ohio in 2008, I was immediately hit by how important Ohio is politically. Being a swing state in a nation that uses the electoral college system and living in a capital city, there's a lot of opportunity to use your voice for positive change. So because I love to research, write, speak, communicate, that led naturally to blogging, which was on the rise at the time. And in the process of blogging, I got to meet a lot of amazing people, interview political leaders, talk to experts, and do research into the science behind any particular issue that I was writing about. And I have friends who are small business owners, and they started asking me for help with getting their businesses seen online. And I realized that I'd learned this entire skill set of digital marketing through blogging, through being online, through promoting these ideas, for advocating for them. And for a while, I did my own small business of being a digital marketing coach. And then I decided I wanted to learn to code so that I could develop websites for clients, so that I could build apps. And in the process of researching, I began to learn more about the tech industry. And at the time, a lot of people had started to write articles designed to get more diverse people into tech, and they were talking about it in ways that broke the stereotypes that a lot of us have about the tech industry. And the way that they described it resonated with me, and the way that they described that there was a place for somebody like me, somebody who loved to dig deep into a problem and then communicate solutions. But as I was learning more about the tech industry, of course, the issue of a lack of diversity and inclusion came into the forefront of my awareness. And that really went through that whole process of curiosity until it rose to be the peak thing that I was interested in. did a lot of research. I looked at what sociology had to say about this problem, what gender studies, what psychology had to teach us about it. I looked at things like unconscious bias and what are scientifically proven ways to mitigate unconscious bias. And so that led to me giving talks. I gave a talk at TEDx Columbus, other places, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the Ohio State University, and most importantly, Columbus Web Group. So I care deeply about cybersecurity because of what it protects. As more and more things are connected to the internet and more of our lives are lived online, the reality is that everything is made vulnerable by that connectivity. And therefore, cybersecurity protects all of these things. Just think about something that matters to you deeply, and it's not much of a stretch then to think about how cybersecurity helps protect that thing. So cybersecurity was an interest of mine from a while back, but it wasn't at the surface the most important thing. And the most important thing, the thing that was taking up all my time and energy and thought, was the diversity and inclusion problem. But along the way, I met some amazing people who encouraged my interest in cybersecurity. The first was Parisa Tabriz. She's the head of security team at Google Chrome. And she invited me to meet with her at Google when I took a trip out to California for a conference, and I found her very inspiring, and she's still a role model of mine. The other is Helen Patton. She's the Chief Information Security Officer at OSU, and she spent a lot of time encouraging my curiosity and encouraging me to explore cybersecurity further. And the third is Joe Tyson. He's co-founded multiple companies, and he's been a Chief Technical Officer and engineer in several companies. So his expertise in technology runs really deep, and he's been giving me ongoing mentoring sessions where I bombard him with questions about cybersecurity, and he patiently answers all of my questions. So October 2016 was a pivotal moment for me in what I was most interested in, what I prioritized. All throughout 2016, it was a nonstop barrage of horrible cybersecurity stories, you may remember. But in October 2016, we experienced the largest attack against basic internet infrastructure to date. And that moment, because of what I understood at that time, I could see how things were escalating in a way that made me uncomfortable, and I really wanted to do something about it. And at that, I announced to my friends, I said, okay, this has become my top priority. So I'm on a mission to raise cybersecurity awareness. I want more people to know, not just this vague, scary thing, but have good information and know strategic things to do to make things better. So I can try to talk about too much in my talks, and so I might skim over something that you find confusing, and we might not be able to get to it in the question and answer session, but please tweet at me your questions, tonight, tomorrow, anytime in the future. It's at Lauren M. Kinsey. The M isn't part of my last name. So let's stay connected that way. I love to share information. And if you tweet at me publicly, then other people can see the conversation. They can learn from the conversation too. All right, so I want you to think for a moment about what grade you would give yourself as somebody's, your personal cybersecurity awareness and hygiene. Raise your hand if you give yourself an F. Some very honest people in this row. A D, a C, a B. Any A students? Beyonce gave herself a B. It's only fitting. So this is my definition of what a C student is. So I base this on hearing many, many, many experts say these very repetitive, if they're interviewed for an article that's aimed at the general populace because some news story has broken and they're trying to help people improve their habits, they say these same 5 things over and over. And the reason I give this a C level instead of a higher level is because there's so much more to know and do beyond this. But if we all did this, so much of what happened in 2016 wouldn't have happened. 2-factor all the things. So how many people here know what 2-factor is? Great, okay. For those that don't, I'll explain more further down the line. Make your life easier with a password manager. How many people know what a password manager is? Good. If you love it, back it up. If you don't love it, delete it. How many people do this? Good. Avoid and report phishing. Pay attention and use your voice. This means pay attention to what's happening with companies so that you can exert your power as a consumer to not patronize companies that are not being secure, and pay attention to what's happening in government so that there's not overreach or too much laxity. Make sure that the regulations are good. So what are common barriers to people practicing these 5 things, or just good cybersecurity overall? Confusion or arrogance. So there's a lot of confusion. It's a hard topic to wrap your hands around. But arrogance is when you think that you already know what you need to know, and so you're not open to learning more. Fear or apathy. So vague fear that is undefined and unfocused is crippling. Apathy is the other end of the extreme where you don't think it's a problem and you don't really care. Avoidance or procrastination. When these things combine, we get major suckage. It's okay to laugh at that. It's not a proper term. What's the alternative? Good information, healthy fear. So a healthy fear is when you know what the threats are and you know what's an appropriate response to those threats. And having a concrete action plan can overcome the avoidance and procrastination. And that all leads to pretty good security. So why do I say pretty good and not perfect? That's right. We live in an imperfect world. We need to shoot for pretty good. Often when people shoot for perfection, it becomes the enemy of the good. You might have heard that cliche. So what's one reason people might feel apathetic about cybersecurity? I have a theory. So when I hear hacker, I kind of think of something good. I don't feel scared when you say a hacker is going to hack me, because a hacker is a security researcher, right? It's just somebody that's testing the system. Or a hacker is one of the many characters I've seen in TV and movies that's just out to make the world a better place. And we should support these hackers. We should give them a path to report bugs. We should support companies doing this for them. We should have bug bounty programs where hackers can get paid for pointing out flaws in the government as well as in private industry. And we should make sure that laws and regulations aren't punitive for hackers and are supportive of what they do. But who's the real threat when we think about who's hacking us and why we shouldn't feel apathetic about it? Organized crime, foreign adversaries, terrorist organizations, and violent extremist groups. The difference between a terrorist organization by the FBI standard and a violent extremist group, they both use violence to reach their aims, but a terrorist group is international and a violent extremist group is here in our country. Okay, so pop quiz. Raise your hand and name one of the 4 threats that I just listed. Organized crime. Good, good. Anybody else?
Terrorist groups, international.
Good.
Violent extremist groups.
Good job. Yeah.
Foreign adversaries?
What?
Foreign adversaries?
Yes, good. So another way to think about these, I feel like the words that we have to describe these threats aren't sufficient. So one analogy that can help you think about the threat that they pose is a diseased rodent. So a diseased rodent population, if you feed it, it multiplies. If you let it get your data, if you let it get access to making a profit off of you, it only grows and grows and spreads disease. So the Pew Research Center did a study in 2016, and they looked into what's going on with Americans and their attitudes and habits towards cybersecurity. And there's a lot of confusion. So we have this strange double standard where we're angry at our institutions for not doing more to protect us, but we ourselves are not doing the things that we can do to protect us. Only 52% of people are using some form of two-factor authentication. So raise your hand if you're using two-factor everywhere you can possibly use it. Good. And for those that don't know what two-factor authentication is, it's when you have to enter your password, but then you also have a second thing that you enter that's based on something that you physically have with you. So that could be an app on your phone that gives you a one-time code to put in, or it can be a text message, or it can be a physical thing like this YubiKey. So if you're not certain if you're using two-factor everywhere you can possibly use it, this is a great resource. Go to twofactorauth.org and put in some place that you have an account, and you can see if they offer two-factor authentication. If you know of a place that isn't in their database, you can do a pull request on GitHub to support this project. Only 14% of Americans currently use a password manager. So a password manager is an online vault in which you store all your passwords. It can help make the process of logging in much easier, but the main purpose is to make sure that you have unique passwords for each account, and they're genuinely hard to crack. So humans have a hard time being random. So we think we've created a random password that would be hard to crack by a software program, but we often do things that are very predictable. So a password manager can help you generate truly difficult to crack passwords. And it can also help you with things like maybe you heard about the Heartbleed situation, where you have to change many, many passwords at once. It can help streamline that process for you. And it can measure your security and kind of give you prompts and feedback to improve it. So you might have heard in 2016, a lot of celebrities and high-profile people had their Twitter accounts hacked, and it was based on another breach that happened on LinkedIn where their credentials got out in the hands of the terrorist groups and other organizations. And we don't know who has the data. We just know they're profiting from it. And the reason that their Twitter accounts got hacked is because they were using the same password on multiple sites, which would not happen had they been using password managers. So to reiterate, based on the research that's out there, we're not doing enough to protect ourselves, and that's leading to many, many complex issues. And I'll go over what happened in 2016. I was going to give you a bird's eye view of the big stories from 2016, but since this is a tech talk, a drone's eye view. There that is again, isn't that awesome? Record-breaking distributed denial of service attacks with Internet of Things enabled botnets. So if that's a lot of gobbledygook for you, I'll break that down in a little bit. Election-related cyber activity. Ransomware attacks up by 6,000%. Record-breaking breaches were announced. They didn't all happen this year, but we learned about a lot of them this year. And about 1 in every 16 US adults was a victim of identity theft. Okay, so what's this? What's this Internet of Things, botnets, distributed denial of service? So a botnet is created when malicious software infects my DVR, your home security camera, a nearby hospital's MRI machine, your router, and thousands of other devices. And we don't even know that's happening. So these can be infected, and we have no clue. Maybe it slows things down a little bit. Maybe there's no sign. And all of these things, it's like a bunch of tiny robots coming together into one giant robot called a botnet. So the processing power from all these connected devices goes into one thing, and that is under the control of one of the 4 threats. And they use that for something called a distributed denial of service attack, which is basically throwing so much junk traffic at a website or a server that you take it offline. And this is a serious problem because so much of our lives are online. You take something offline, so you take a hospital offline, you take a nuclear power plant offline, you take a water filtration system offline, can do a lot of damage. The potential for this, the fact that botnets are growing in power is alarming. So this is one of my heroes, Bruce Schneier. He said, over the past year or two, someone has been probing the defenses of the companies that run critical pieces of the internet. These probes take the form of precisely calibrated attacks designed to determine exactly how well these companies can defend themselves and what would be required to take them down. We don't know who is doing this, but it feels like a large nation state. China or Russia would be my first guess. So this is a cautionary tale about paying attention and using your voice. So the reason that we need to pay attention and use our voice on this particular issue is because the Internet of Things is growing quickly, and it's growing in a way that's insecure. And we have some say about that. So what I mean by it's growing in a way that's insecure. So these devices often come with a password you can't change, or software that won't be updated. And when software doesn't get updated, zero-day vulnerabilities, if that doesn't mean anything to you, just say vulnerabilities don't get fixed. And so it's very easy then to hijack these devices. So we need to pay attention to which companies are implementing security practices properly and reward them by buying their products and not buying other products. And we need to pay attention to, eventually this will be regulated because this is going to reach a scale where something very dangerous happens. And we don't want it to get to that point because when regulation is passed in a crisis, often there's overreach and it's messy and not effective. So to reiterate, we've covered what it means to two-factor all the things. Raise your hand if you're committed to taking that one step further, or if you're doing it already, you'll inform other people about it. Make your life easier with a password. Raise your hand. Going to do it. Tell other people. Pay attention and use your voice. Now, we're going to move to if you love it, back it up. If you don't love it, delete it, and why that's important. And then we'll move to avoid and report phishing. So if you read the news stories about ransomware, you'll hear some very intense things said. So ransomware is weaponized encryption. What does that mean? So encryption is basically just scrambling data so that nobody can decode it, nobody can read it, nobody can see what it is unless they have the key. So it's a way of helping to protect data and increase privacy and security. But it's been weaponized in that ransomware says, I've encrypted your files and you can't get them decrypted until you pay me a ransom. So with the sharp increase of this way of attacking people and the fact that it's so profitable, people are saying it's like a gold rush. And it allows the attackers to profit directly from you instead of having to take your data and sell it on the black market. So it streamlines the process of profiting off your data. And you don't need to be skilled to do this. We have this idea that the attackers are people who are very intelligent, super skilled, technologically wise people. But there are toolkits out there that anybody can buy and use to do this. So the United States was a prime target for ransomware in 2016. In second place came Canada, and then everybody else was much smaller slices of the pie. So why are we being targeted? Because we're a wealthy country, and because we're very well connected to the internet. So many things are online here. And because we're a little sloppy with our security. So research shows that in 2016, 64% of people that were attacked with ransomware ended up paying the ransom. So do you remember the slide with the diseased rats? So you feed the rats, they multiply. So it's good to not pay, to think about how, if you were attacked with ransomware, you could avoid paying the ransom. In 2016, ransomware shut down the transportation, part of the transportation system in San Francisco, so sort of the equivalent of CODA here. The hacker asked for $73,000, and they lost $50,000 with just having to give away free rides. Unfortunately, they lost that money, but fortunately, they had backups. So they didn't have to pay the ransom and reinforce that cycle, and it cost them a little less than it would have to pay the ransom. So this is a place that I recommend that's good for backing up your data. They're based in Canada. They're super private. They're super encrypted. And if you are a victim of ransomware, go to nomoreransom.org, and they, for some forms of ransomware, they have ways to unencrypt your files. And they also just have good information about how to protect yourself and learn more about ransomware. Two-factor all the things, make your life easier with Password Manager, pay attention and use your voice. If you love it, back it up. If you don't, delete it. This means accounts too, not just data, because the more data you have spread out there and the more accounts you have spread out there, the more attack surface you have, the more ways that you can be breached. Now let's move to avoid and report phishing. The most devastating attacks by the most sophisticated attackers almost always begin with the simple act of spear phishing. So phishing is when you're tricked, basically. You're tricked into thinking that an email that you're getting is from somebody legitimate. You're tricked into thinking that a website that you're going to download something from is legitimate. So these are all the ways that attackers can get your credentials. And by far, the biggest one is social engineering, which just means psychological manipulation, being tricked. And the biggest way this happens is through something called phishing, where you're given something that looks legitimate, you click on it, it asks for your credentials, you give it, or it asks you to download something to your computer and you get infected that way. And the biggest way that phishing gets to us is through email. And you might think, oh, I know about phishing emails. They are from, some prince asking for a wire transfer, and they're filled with, grammatical errors. They're pretty easy to spot. Well, they're getting much more convincing. So this is a phish from 2016. John Podesta, the campaign manager for Hillary Clinton, fell victim to this particular phish. Phishes generally succeed by creating a sense of urgency and danger. You think something's wrong and you have to act right away. So this looks exactly like an email from Google, and it says that you need to change your password. So if you get something saying you need to change your password, do not click on the link in the email. Go to the account itself and change your password in there. And if you get a phishing email or just an email that you think is suspicious, you can go to this website to report it. And the more we report these things, the less they spread. So who feels confident that if they weren't a C student at the beginning of this talk, they're ready to be one now? Good. And if you are ready to move to B level, you can tweet at me and say you're ready to be like Beyonce, or whatever else you want to say. And I want to thank you again for being here tonight, for taking the time, and for being part of this wonderful community. And I want to thank the Columbus Web Group crew, Laura, Kevin, Brian, and Sean. And again, tweet your questions at me if we don't cover them in the question and answer session. Thank you.
Do you mind if we turn on the lights?
Oh, sure, yeah, let's turn them on for that.
We have microphones for questions. And that's for the
So, is this on? So I thought that maybe if I forgot my passwords a lot and had to reset them a lot, that I was being like secure enough in a way.
Yeah.
Do you have a comment on that?
Use a password manager.
What was it, two-step authentication?
Yeah, so some people, this is interesting, a good point to bring up. So some people think that if they use two-factor authentication, then they can have sloppy passwords. They can use the same password everywhere. They can have an easy-to-crack password because they're using two-factor authentication. But if you make your password easy to crack, you're actually doing one-factor authentication. The idea of two-factor authentication is that you're putting another barrier. So make strong, unique passwords with a password manager and use two-factor authentication. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I thought maybe just because they reset it a lot.
Well, if you use a password manager, that can make it easier to...
They automate it for you?
No, you go in and click it, but it does it for you, so you're not... Yeah.
I'll get you going here. So on the computers nowadays, laptops, computers, there's a lot of virus protection and everything else. But mobile development, mobile itself is becoming a big thing, and you don't have as much security. What do you recommend when people are looking at the same websites, paying their bills and everything else, giving away a lot of passwords if their phones are hacked? What do you recommend when it comes to that? What are your thoughts?
You're wondering if people are less secure when they're searching the web on their phone?
Paying bills on the phone, yes.
So all of these things can help you stay secure on your phone. Oh.
Do you feel there's more of a threat being hacked on your phone versus on a laptop?
I think it really is about your habits and keeping your software updated on your phone, of your apps, and being cautious about what apps you put on your phone. That's a common vector for problems. And then, having good hygiene and really knowing how to detect a phish. And the same malware is going to get to you kind of in the same ways, whether you're online on your computer or online on your phone.
So I think you may have covered this, but I've had a few conversations with people, and there has seemed to be some confusion around using two-factor authentication via SMS, and how SMS doesn't really qualify as a valid form of two-factor authentication. I was wondering if you wanted to speak to that at all,
Sure,
since there have been several documented attempts or several documented accounts, again in 2016, of basically, code intercepts,
Right.
And it's now completely deprecated to use any form of SMS codes via for two-factor.
So preferably, if you have an account that offers two-factor authentication either through an app on your phone that will give you a one-time code or through getting a text message, always choose the app option. But if there's no other option, do the text message, because even though things are flawed and imperfect, it's still better to do something than nothing. That's what I would say to that. And also, use your voice, pay attention, that principle. Let companies know you want them to offer two-factor authentication and you want it to be the most secure form of two-factor authentication. Thank you, that's a good question.
Like 1.5 factor.
Yeah, yeah.
So do you consider our government to be on our side, or that's another vector of attack that we have to kind of protect against, because we all know that they collect our data and they might even hack into some journalists and other people.
Right, there's always the risk of governments becoming oppressive, and so it's good to pay attention for that reason. I still believe that we live in a democracy, although it's flawed, and that using our voices to influence policy is important, and asking our government to play a role to protect us is important. But yes, there are tools that you can use if you want to move up to B and C, B and A student level, to keep your data more private. Good point to bring up. Thank you.
First,
Oh.
First, I want to say thank you for your presentation, as well as I'm interested in cybersecurity, being an aspiring female student. But one of the things I'm passionate about is driverless cars in cybersecurity. That's something I've been doing a lot of research on, and I want to find out your thoughts about cybersecurity, consumers' privacy, things like that.
Yeah, so that's definitely an area where we need to be paying attention to what companies are doing, rewarding companies that are doing it right and not buying from companies that are doing it wrong, and using our voice in the government to make sure. Because the financial incentives for a company, it's expensive for them to implement good security practices. So we have to make it worth it for them by having an economic consequence if they're insecure. So it really, again, all of these threats can escalate into the level of cyber warfare where it's a nation state. So the worst case scenarios of attacks against, say, something like we automate all our vehicles are at that level. So we need to take it seriously and really think about what we want to ask companies to be doing to make automated vehicles as safe as they can be.
Hi. Hello. Hi.
Hello.
So I run a web business and I'm not a tech person. I have a question. I hope it isn't too obvious. I had a question about ransomware and how could you share how they normally access your information or your databases? Do they just try to find a way to phish your code repository password and get in that way, or?
Yeah, the main way they're going to get to you is through a phishing attack. So if you download something, they can infect you that way.
do you have any advice for like a web business owner? Like, what should they be looking at in order to avoid, falling victim to attacks?
Yes, all these practices, and especially the learning about how to recognize a phishing attack. And then beyond that, there's, what was the website? Don't pay the ransom. Okay.
No more ransom.
No more ransom, thank you, yeah.
So I don't know how far you went with your research, and this might be a little bit out of scope, but what do you see the future of cybersecurity, maybe 10, 20 years down the road? What will be the biggest obstacles, the challenges that we have to overcome when it comes to cybersecurity?
Great, thank you, that's a great question. So the biggest obstacle is getting people informed and caring, right? So if a populace is engaged in this problem, then we're going to be more secure. If we're disengaged from the problem, we're going to be less secure. So it's a game of, think of it as a predator and prey. Evolution makes the predator evolve to catch the prey better. The prey then has to evolve to outsmart the predator, and it goes up and up and up. So, for example, with artificial intelligence, if the predators master that as an attack form before we master it for defense, we're going to be in bad shape. So with that, we need to do everything we can to master using artificial intelligence as a defense mechanism to protect things.
I have one more question.
Sure.
It's more specific to that same context. So with the ransomware, obviously it sounds like one of the solutions is making sure your data is backed up.
Yeah.
That way you can still deploy that.
Yeah.
However, when your research, have you spoke to anybody, like an expert, to say that may not be the case? Or is there going to be another obstacle we have to overcome? Is there going to be another attack vector when it comes to ransomware where backing up your data is not going to save you?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to hurt even if you backed up your data. Getting taken offline if you're a business for any amount of time is horrible. If you're a hospital, lives are at stake. So, things that we can do beyond just backing up our data, reporting, paying attention to who's creating these databases and tracking the threats can help suppress the threat. And, educating each other and making sure we're doing best practices ourselves. So yeah, backing up your data might not help you if what they've done is encrypt a machine itself, and you can't restore the machine. So there's many ways that it can hurt you, and backing up isn't a total solution. Is that what?
It's more in lines of in the future, like 20 years down the road.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Predicting how ransomware will operate in the future.
What would be, when you spoke with the experts and you did your research, what did you find as to what's the next attack vector? What's going to happen?
Beyond ransomware?
In the same sense, but with the current solutions that we have right now, what other solutions?
Well, one scenario is at the level of, one thing that we do globally, the global community, when a nation is committing war crimes, doing something horrible, developing nuclear weapons without the consent of the international community, we do sanctions, right? So a country that has sanctions against them can use cyber extortion techniques to extract money and put their own sanction back in the United States. So say we all have connected cars, everything's connected, they can shut everything down and say, you pay us. So that's an example of a futuristic scenario of where things could escalate with ransomware. Is that what you're getting at? Is there something you have in mind?
It's a hard question to ask because essentially what we're asking is, can you foresee the future? And
Right.
we don't really know what would be the next obstacle or the next attack that when it comes to ransomware.
Yeah.
I guess I'm always thinking ahead.
Yeah.
I always got to think 3 or 2 years ahead, especially
Yeah.
with information security.
Yeah. Yeah, so the best way for us to think ahead is do everything we possibly can do to make these attacks not possible. And then once they happen, to do an analysis of the data and make sure we have that in databases so that we can do things like hand out the keys to decrypt what they're using. So both sides of the equation, prevent and respond. Yeah.
Thanks for the talk. What's that? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
How's this going?
I expect you to croon.
You enjoy So, practically, do you have recommendations for two-factor auth apps and a resource that will tell me different manufacturers that are doing the Internet of Things correctly?
Resource that'll tell you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, like for finding Internet of Things devices. Say you're shopping for a new refrigerator and you want it to be connected. How do you find the safe one, right? Is that what you're asking?
And also password managers. I'm just looking for all the things I can actually
All the
download. All the stuff.
Use this one. Okay. So with two-factor authentication apps, I haven't heard anything that one is better than the other. With a resource for if you're shopping for a new refrigerator and you want an internet-connected one, how do you find a safe one? Google. Just say, is this brand, that brand, cybersecurity or security? There will be articles written. What was the other resource that you wanted? Password managers. Okay, so every year, resources like CNET will write articles, the top 10 password managers. So use that resource to read their little blurbs about what the password managers offer and see what features work best for you. Some things are going to be more important to some people than to others. I don't want to recommend just one password manager because of that.
A comment and a question.
Yes.
One of the most popular password managers, LastPass, a couple of years ago, had its own breach,
Yeah.
which was a really big deal since it was the recommended one from Lifehacker. It had a lot of backing behind it. So I would say that that's something to think about as well.
Yeah.
That increasingly a lot of the competitors are also in the cloud, but even that isn't a guarantee that you're going to be fine.
Nothing is a guarantee.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
pretty good.
Be good.
Security.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Second question is, do you have any insight? I haven't gotten to read about this very much lately, but with the most recent Cloudflare hack, was that due to a database out there that didn't have a firewall in front of it?
I think people are still breaking that one down because it's so new.
Because that's a go and check a resource for that, because everybody in this room probably has 10 passwords they need to change right now.
Yes, and that's why it's great to have a password manager, because it streamlines that process for you. So if there's one thing you go and do tomorrow, that should be it because of the current situation with Cloudflare. Thank you. Oh, 2 more questions.
So actually, this was kind of a response to his question about the central. So there are password managers that are not cloud-based, and not to necessarily make an endorsement, but I use one called Codebook, which has passed independent security audits. It has an open source engine, and it does allow for two-way synchronization, master-master synchronization, but you are responsible for the data.
Oh, I have a solution.
Well, yeah, no, I'm sure you did if you had the question, right? But speaking to the room, if you're worried about a cloud service provider storing your passwords, which you should be, because it's a good question.
So you're saying it's stored locally on your laptop?
It doesn't have to be. It can be. It has multiple options for synchronizing, but you're responsible for storing the data somewhere. And it can do master-master replication from your phone, from your laptop.
And how do you protect that, say, from a ransomware attack?
Well, like you said, back up anything you care about.
Okay, so You
Yeah.
back up your passwords.
And actually, I was also going to ask, with regards to your sync.com
Yeah.
recommendation, how do you, I'm genuinely curious about this, if your data is backed up on that and it's synchronizing,
Yeah.
and your data gets destroyed by ransomware, how do you prevent the sync agent from uploading the encrypted version?
To your cloud account?
Yeah.
That is a good question. I don't know the
Yeah.
answer.
Do they have a revision history, or they have 30 days of
Yeah.
backups?
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, that answers my question.
Okay, good. I knew that. Why didn't I say that? Okay, so once again, the thing is that nothing is perfect, right? So password managers, often when I talk about password managers, people point out the flaws with an online password manager. But over and over again, the majority of cybersecurity experts recommend them. And so I think that that's the thing to pay attention to, because they're the ones that know what the threat landscape is and what the best ways to reduce the threat. So nothing is pure, nothing is perfect, but they recommend people do that because the end result is greater security.
I just want to mention that if you use password manager or anything like that, just use
Two-factor.
Use two-factor.
Yeah,
I
thanks so
want to do
much.
that, so.
Yeah. Make sure that the password you have for your password manager is strong, and use two-factor authentication. Thank you for bringing that up.
We have time for one last question.
Okay.
So it seems like once a week I get a call from my grandma that somebody called her saying there was a virus on her machine and they need to get on her computer to do stuff. Is there a way to report those kind of phishing things? You talked about phishing emails.
Yeah.
Is there a way to report people calling?
Do you know the answer to that question?
I don't know a way to report it, but actually Alex and I were at dinner the other day and I had a little bit of fun with these people. So I was like, oh, that's great, that's awesome. And you just put your phone on hold and you just put it down. You go back to, oh, I'm getting my computer, hold on a second. Put your phone back on hold, put it down. If you keep doing this, you can do it for about 8 or 9 minutes. That's probably 15 people they don't get to talk to.
Yeah.
So,
Bravo.
I stole that from Philip Elmwood, so I didn't.
I love it. That's a little less rat food for the rats.
Yeah.
Definitely do it. We have an answer to where you report the phone.
Report them to the FCC.
The phone call. Oh yeah. Yeah.
You can report that way, and then also you can do this number you can call. It's a government phone thing where you can take your phone out of circulation.
Yes.
I'm not sure if people attackers are going to respect
Yeah.
But the government agency that regulates that is the FCC, and they have very simple online instructions on how to report that.
That's cool.
Good.
Thanks.
Did everybody get that? If you get a phishing phone call, report it to the FCC. Awesome. Thank you.